Hello and welcome to Merlin Reviews. Today is yet another request from Dimebag Zombie. Thank you for your support. And that would be a character analysis of Herbert West, the main protagonist of H.P. Lovecraft's horror novella, Herbert West, Re-Animator. I was first introduced to Lovecraft years ago and picked up a collection of his short stories, novellas, poetry, and essays. He's easily one of the most influential writers of the early 20th century, helping solidify modern horror and science fiction. He's probably best known for his Cthulhu mythos, in which ancient beings of unimaginable evil are at the source of our cold and uncaring universe. Safe to say, his stuff can get pretty dark. You may notice his influence on the films of John Carpenter, particularly The Thing, Prince of Darkness, and Mouths of Madness, the Hellraiser movies by Clive Barker, and popular manga such as Berserk. Today we'll be taking a look at one of his one-off stories, but easily one of his most popular. Herbert West is the inventor of a special solution that, when injected into the main artery of a recently deceased human being, causes the body's living functions to return. However, most subjects that have undergone the reanimation process have turned violent and, after failed attempts to return to their graves, have terrorized the communities from which they came. In Lovecraft's tale, Herbert West was ostracized by his fellow medical students because he believed he could overcome death and had only one friend, the unnamed narrator of the story. After a series of successful experiments, Herbert West is, spoilers, eventually murdered by his own creations. It is worth noting that Lovecraft wrote the story as a parody of sorts of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. The parallels of the story are fairly obvious. Both men were eccentric scientists who believed that they could reanimate the living. The main difference is in how the men react to their situation. After creating the monster, Frankenstein is horrified and realizes, perhaps a bit too harshly, the fault of his arrogance. He flees from the monster and is hunted by it for the rest of the story. The evil of the monster immediately begins as a reaction of its father figure being one of horror. Herbert West, on the other hand, does not recoil immediately and give up on his experiments. With each failed attempt, he simply sees it as another means of scientific advancement. If one experiment fails, try again. However, West doesn't particularly care for the moral gray area of his actions. His creations come back violent and insane, wreaking havoc across the countryside. His reaction to this ranges from nonchalant to rather gleeful. Based upon the narrator, West becomes more and more mentally unstable as the investigations continue. Much like Lovecraft's other work, West is an example of the darker side of nature, humanity, and science. West's perspective is that the human body is a type of machine, which is technically correct. With his concoction, he believes he can find the formula for life itself, except without taking into account things like the soul, what makes an individual, furthering the idea that science can't explain everything. He eventually furthers his point by animating individual parts of the body, with mixed success. It is revealed that he even began killing people to provide necessary bodies for his experimentations. West's tale could be seen as a cautionary one, much like Frankenstein's, regarding the darker side of science and the need to tread carefully into the great unknown. Though the idea is of a less religious sense than in Frankenstein's, the fact that West is eventually killed by his own creations is a very telling conclusion. If you're interested in the story, it can easily be found online with the rest of Lovecraft's work, which I highly recommend to horror fans. You can also see the story in its most well-known adaptation, the 1985 film starring Jeffrey Combs of Star Trek and Justice League fame. The film stays pretty true to the story, with a more modern retelling and over a much shorter time span. Well, those are my thoughts on Herbert West. Please feel free to comment, share, subscribe, and send in more requests. Alright everyone, stay magical, my friends.